So how does the automatic safety in a revolver actually work? Well, that's what we'll explore in this video. Guys, welcome to the channel, The Modern Survivalist, and this is a question I get fairly often. Now, usually people are knowledgeable enough to understand that, for example, a Glock pistol that maybe many of you already own, you don't have any manual safety. That does not mean that the gun does not incorporate safeties of its own. In the case of the Glock, it's going to be two internal ones, one on the trigger itself. So that would be considered an external safety. But all of these are automatic. Basically, you don't even have to think about it. You just put your finger inside the trigger guard, pull the trigger, and the gun does what it's supposed to do, which is fire. As long as you have ammunition, as long as there's a round in the chamber and the gun is ready to fire, the gun will do its thing. An added manual safety on the outside, does it add anything? I don't think it honestly does. I think that as long as a gun works as it's supposed to, not firing on its own, not having design flaws that make it dangerous in terms of it fires when it drops, it fires out of bare movement, as it's unfortunately the case with the SIG P320, as even videos at this time show. Well, those are safety problems. As long as a gun does not fire when you don't want it to fire and when you're not manually actioning the trigger of the gun, which unavoidably in a working firearm should fire, right? That makes it a safe gun. Now, in the case of most revolvers these days, they do incorporate safeties, and a lot of people don't know that. People think that revolvers don't have safeties because you don't have a lever outside. Well, that's always an interesting case, because you also need to understand how safeties work. For people that are not really all that knowledgeable, they want to see something like this. They want to see, oh, now it's safe, fire, right? So safe means that I'm good. I can be as stupid as I want. Fire, and there's an image from Black Hawk Down. There's a scene where one of the guys there says that this is his safety. And yeah, actually there's a lot to be said about that. Now, things are not always that simple. As I said before, there's firearms that have poor designs. They're poorly designed, and that means that it may fire without you actually engaging the trigger, using the trigger so as to get that result. That is a poor design. So it's not always that this is your safety. Mostly, yes, especially with a proper firearm, with a good, well-designed firearm. That should be the only safety that really matters, because everything else works automatically. But also keep in mind that many times some of these safeties, they do not fully disengage, things like blocking the firing pin or things like that. There's guns in which even with the safety on, right? Oh, now it's safe. Well, many guns out there will have a safety like this, but the moment it drops, it may end up firing. So know your guns, know the design, understand what safety actually means for that specific design, because if not, you may end up making a big mistake. Now, in terms of revolvers, the Colt Python uses the police positive safe. Was it the name? Well, that was introduced back in 1907, if I remember correctly, with the police positive revolver. And the positive safety basically works in this way. As you see, the revolver is, well, basically in its rested position, but the hammer is not making contact with the firing pin, which is mounted on the frame itself. You don't have a needle here. No, that's the pin. It's inside the frame itself, right? So the moment in which the hammer drops, hits that, it's going to be firing those rounds, right? Well, that's how the safety works. In the moment in which you pull the trigger, the hammer drops, the gun fires. But the moment you release the trigger, and this may even be considered as a second safety, in which the rebound of the hammer just pulls it back and locks it in this position until you pull the trigger again. If I pull the trigger again, it fires, or it would if I actually had real rounds and not snap caps in the revolver, right? So as you see, this makes it super safe. When I pull back, that middle piece drops and it allows me to fire as long as I'm pulling the trigger, right? If I regret at the last second and remove my finger, comes up, does not let it go forward enough to make contact. It doesn't matter if it's a few millimeters, it doesn't matter if it's a few yards. There's a piece of metal right there in the way that is not allowing the hammer to go further forward and doing what it's supposed to do to actually fire. That would be the police positive safety introduced over 100 years ago. Release it, moves back, same thing, locked into place, and the gun is perfectly safe until you are ready to pull the trigger and fire again. Doesn't matter if it's in double action, doesn't matter if it's in single action. The trigger needs to be pulled for this thing to fire. If not, just stays there. Doesn't matter if you hit it. For those that are not aware of this, in your old West revolvers, those single actions, heck, even from Colt, the famous Colt single action, the Peacemaker, well, that was a single action revolver. The only thing that trigger did was releasing the hammer. You had to actually manually mount the hammer each time you fired. The only thing the trigger did was drop the hammer. When you release it, it did not move forward. It stayed here in the back. It's a thin little trigger that stays there in the back, and you have to manually cock it, and only does, that's why it's called a single action. It does a single thing. The double action both cocks and releases the hammer. Single action only releases. But in those revolvers, because they did not have this safety feature, you were required to have an empty chamber in that gun, and that's where the hammer was rested. You load it so as to have only 5 cylinders with rounds, and one where the hammer was resting was always left empty, because even a slight bump on that hammer would cause the gun to fire. Here, you can hit it with a hammer, drop it from a plane, doesn't matter what you do, no matter what you do, there's a piece of metal there in the way, and it will just break to pieces before it does anything. It simply cannot hit that that firing pin so as to get the gun to fire. So that would be one of the, I mean, you have other safeties from Smith & Wesson, Ruger. You have like transfer bars, that is a piece of metal that gets in the way and transfer the energy so as to have the gun fire, and unless that piece is up there, it simply does not hit and transfer the energy for the gun to work. This basically physically gets in the way of the hammer. So all of these features make well-designed firearms very safe to use and very safe to carry. Again, up until the point in which you pull the trigger. If you pull the trigger when you're not supposed to, that is not a flaw of the design. That is not a flaw of, oh, but if I only had a... No, there's no dumbass lever. That's going to be in your brain. You have to be smart. You have to be aware of the most important safety of them all, which is your brain and your trigger finger not going there, or you being smart enough to not carry this loose in a purse, loaded, and maybe getting a pin, damn lipstick or Legos or whatever the hell it is, getting in there, or having a holster that is not adequate for your gun. One of the accidental discharges that I've seen was that a guy had a leather holster for his Glock inside the waistband. Sweaty summer, that thing became all flappy and moist and loose, and one of those times in which he was reholstering, the flap of the leather holster got in there, and when he sat, it just put enough pressure and it actually fired. But something actually fired the gun. Maybe it wasn't your finger, it was your stupidity or your negligence or your lack of knowledge. You don't want to have anything that can deform based on humidity and maybe get in the way. Or maybe your clothes. You have way too loose clothes and it just caught in there and you pushed it in there, and when you were holstering, the gun fires. Again, not a problem of the gun, problem of the user. Internal safeties from quality manufacturers, good designs, they will do what they're supposed to. Guys, if you want to learn more about all of this stuff, you have my books available in the links below in Amazon, Street Survival Skills and Surviving the Economic Collapse, where I cover a lot of these topics. safety, self-defense, economic collapse survival and preparedness, and a bunch of other things that you probably are into. And if you want to see any videos of specific topics you'd like me to cover, let me know in the comments. I always read those, especially the first couple of days when I upload a video, and that is always welcome. Any topic you'd like me to address or talk about in another video, just let me know and I'll do my best. See you next time. Take care.